things. So questions and comments from the audience. Come. Yes, at the back.
My question has to do with Cuba. I'm not an expert, but I was there about 5 years ago, and I was told that they're one of the most food insecure nations in the world, that they import 90% of their food, over almost $1 billion in food aid from the United States. So although I saw lots of very healthy farms and some wonderful organic work going on, I wonder if they're a good case example, and I'm just asking.
Well, I don't have a microphone, but...
Oh, sorry.
Well, it depends on where you heard that information, because we actually wrote a paper in a journal here in this country, where we show that data was only referring to some certain portion of the food that is introduced for what is called the canasta básica, which is the basic basket where people actually have access. The government gives everybody a basket of food, and there are certain components there that are important. But you need to understand that actually about 70% of the food that is eaten by the local people there comes from agriculture, but not only rural agriculture, but urban agriculture. There's 50,000 hectares in Cuba of urban agriculture that produces 30% of the vegetables in the major cities like Havana and Villa Clara and so on. So it depends on where you look at this information.
What about the food aid from the United States?
Well, there's no food aid. There's no.
Well, Michigan State was my source, so we'll take that from there.
There's no food aid in the way that food aid.
So it's done the requirement on their part of what they get when they eat is so bad that we were told that.
Okay, well, my question to you is, who told you?
Michigan State.
Oh, okay.
More questions and comments.
I thought it was somebody like the vice minister of Cuba told you something. Michigan State, okay, well.
Hi, I've been hearing a lot in the news about China and how they I don't know if you know much about them, but they're getting rid of all, taking land from subsistence farmers for development and big buildings and, progress, as they call it. And I have not followed it very closely, but I seem to hear a lot about it. Do you know much about what's going on in Asia, the same way that I guess it sounds like Central America might be taking back land, but in Asia they're losing it?
You can say. You can answer.
Well, definitely I think in China that's going on, although there are still a lot of remnants of traditional agriculture in the most remote areas. For example, I've been in the south of China looking at some of the rice, fish, duck systems that are still intact. But definitely China is modernizing at a tremendous pace. And also, we cannot blame it all on the Chinese. I mean, they want some of the goods that we have enjoyed in the society, and the corporations here are pushing those goods there. So it's both ways. I mean, who's pushing what? The modernization process, and not just because the Chinese want to modernize, but there is also, who is selling them the idea that they need to modernize, and who is giving them the goods that they need or they want. Maybe they don't need them, maybe they just want them. And they want them because there has been a huge propaganda, just like people want Coca-Cola here, well, they want Coca-Cola there the same way.
Yes, the lady at the front.
Alisha, I have a question for you that's related to Miguel's talk. I was fascinated by that tree wall that you put up as a potential solution, with the idea that would be a big solution to big problems. And of course, I think many of us thought of the last big solution that was tried in sub-Saharan Africa, which was capturing nitrogen and using it as synthetic fertilizer, and that didn't go so well. And I'm just wondering, in your travels and your work, have you seen some small solutions, kind of in the way that Miguel is describing, that are actually these pockets of success that might be something that could be spread, disseminated? I'd love to hear about those.
Right. One thing, speaking of, just in reference to the Great Green Wall Initiative, the Bixby Center, along with College of Natural Resources, had a symposium here on campus this time last year. There was a Nigerian researcher coming from South Africa who showed evidence of, if this green wall is built, some it's a very small relative distance, like a couple miles north or south, that would actually have impacts on the monsoon season, unintended consequences that could be disastrous. So yes, things need to be done very carefully. Regarding small-scale approaches, I'm familiar with some of them. Something that I'm interested in looking at is we're trying to identify integrated approaches that are feasible at scale. So there are a lot of agriculture extension groups in Africa operating with varying success, but there's also community health outreach workers movements. So I think one opportunity, and I've heard of some examples of this, is integrating their messages so that the same person that's going out with some basic ag extension information could also bring information about, for example, family planning. Regarding your introduction to your part that you weren't intended, I didn't agree with very much that you said there.
What you didn't agree with?
No, I don't disagree with much that you said there. I think that, the climate impacts in most of the world and most of the poor countries can be directly linked with consumption in the north. And in the case of the droughts in the Sahel region in the 70s and 80s, there's evidence that directly links it with burning of coal in the mid-1900s in the U.S. and Europe. So there's no doubt who the perpetrators are there.
Okay.
I think we do need to wind up. My funny tie comes from a restaurant in Bangkok called Cabbages and Condoms. Has anybody been to that? Good. And I think the takeaway message here is that it's going to be incredibly difficult to feed another 2 billion people. We live in a real world where we need to do a lot of very difficult things. I agree that the small farmers in Latin America will do better than the big agricultural farmers. But it's going to take time and an enormous amount of effort to do that. And we have such a huge problem. We're going to have as many people as live in the United States of America by 2050 without any food and without any cattle in the Sahel. That is really what climate change is going to do. And to feed 300 million people from some other part of the world is pretty difficult, especially when we're doing stupid things like making ethanol out of corn. So there's many things that we have to do, but one essential element, and the one that hasn't been emphasized in this meeting, is to give women choices about how many children to have. Women are absolutely central to farming. They're central to the solution of our problems. And we have to invest in women, and we have to give them choices about how many children to have. Because when you're given 7.6 children, as you are in Niger, there is no plausible way that anybody who understands the basic laws of physics and photosynthesis could possibly feed that exploding population. So I appeal to every one of you, when you think about food, think about condoms as well. Thank you.
By the way, that was not my take-home message.
Could I add to that last point? Because I just want to give a concern, because companies like Monsanto, they use that argument of population growth to argue why we should endorse genetically modified crops. And I think that's, it's something that I see as the core of the problem, and how companies like Monsanto, worth $55 billion, is able to get away with a lot of these things that is really profitable for them, but it's basically destroying the economy from within. So, yeah.
Well, this is nothing new. Just read the Food First book that came out 25 years ago called World Hunger 12 Myths. And it's all there.
Thank you for yet another exciting and stimulating session.